an exclusive interview with Senator Bragg. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of evil. Hello, John.
Hello, sir. How are you going?
Very good. Back again. And this time we have Senator Bragg with us as well.
Yes. So we've been on a bit of a campaign over the last couple of months talking about white-collar crime, financial crime. Obviously, we've talked about my experience going with ASIC with a 600-page complaint back in April. And then in recent times, we've spoken about in terms of calling for an inquiry, because my analysis of ASIC was that that ASIC's performance has declined over the last 11 years, and in the last couple of shows last week, we said that Senator Bragg came to the party and moved the motion in the Senate. And it was resolved 43-20 that the Senate Economic References Committee will have an inquiry for the next foreseeable future into ASIC. And Senator Bragg has been kind enough to say, well, he would like to come and talk to our audience about the inquiry and obviously his views on ASIC. And thank you, Senator, for joining us.
Thanks, guys. It's good to be here.
It's great that you've been able to come on, and congratulations on getting the inquiry up and running, which is long overdue in our opinion.
Yeah, well, look, thanks, Martin. It's a very important principle that the Parliament is responsive to the community's needs, and there's no question that ASIC is a regulator which has not been successful in achieving enough prosecutions. So I think it's only reasonable that the Parliament would inquire into that matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's, of course, something which was touched on a little bit through the Royal Commission, although perhaps following that it went a bit quiet. But there does seem to be a bit of a long-seated issue here in terms of trying to decode what ASIC is for and to what extent is it actually looking after the interests of, ordinary Australians, because many Australians expect ASIC to do a whole bunch of things. And I guess part of the question is, should they and are they?
Well, I've always been a purist on this point, that ASIC is there to enforce the law. It's not there to create the law or to lobby for certain things. And the only question is, how effective is it as a law enforcement agency? And there were important steps taken under the former coalition government to try and improve the focus on law enforcement. The appointment of a commissioner focused on law enforcement who had recommended the creation of an office of enforcement, I think was very, very important. Unfortunately, a lot of that has fallen by the wayside. But the answer is law enforcement.
Sure. One of the questions I've got, Senator, is that, so when I was moving around Parliament in terms of early August, I saw you, I think it was about a week later, but I noticed immediately in early August that ASIC doesn't have much political capital in federal Parliament, particularly in the Senate. And it didn't matter which political party I was speaking to, whether it was the Coalition or Labor, Greens, One Nation, UAP, Jackie Lambie, etc. I've never seen an agency or a political issue that has such universal concern. So obviously, I think what you've said in terms of this interview, but also what you said on the 6th of October, that you don't think that ASIC is focused on law enforcement and prosecutions. Can you give our audience a bit of a sense as to are there any sort of other concerns in terms of any other concerns vis-a-vis ASIC? Have you heard from your colleagues in the Senate about their views? What's the general feeling in Parliament about ASIC?
Well, it's not just a concern that ASIC isn't good at law enforcement. I think there's also a cultural problem in Parliament that we want to perhaps consider putting more and more laws onto the statute books so that the statute books are ever higher without inquiring whether or not the laws of the day are actually sufficient and could be enforced rather than added to. There are enormous changes that have been made following the Royal Commission. So ASIC now has more power than it ever has. And so that's why this question of can it actually achieve prosecutions is very important, because I think that unless you can achieve prosecutions, then you're giving the impression that Australia is open for white-collar crime, and that is a major concern. I mean, frankly, these notions were thrown around maybe a decade ago by Greg Medcraft, and at the time, I have to say, I thought that was sort of a bit of a laughable comment. But I think with the ongoing failure to achieve prosecutions, it is very possible that Australia is becoming open to white-collar crime, or certainly more than it has been historically. And in the committee process, we will look through and catalogue where there has been or have been failures to enforce the law. I think you already know there are examples of insider trading and the like, where there have been significant portions of evidence provided but no action taken.
Yeah, and so I guess part of it is it the laws themselves that are necessary and sufficient, or is it that the execution of the laws which exist aren't actually as expected? Because it seems to me those two things are sort of connected, but they're not necessarily precisely the same.
Well, I mean, a lot of the laws are quite new and novel. I mean, the design and distribution obligation, for example, the product intervention power, these are powers that have not been given to regulators in Australia before. So I would say it's too early to say if the law itself is defective. Certainly the question of how many prosecutions are arising from transgressions of the law is the question that we need to be asking ASIC. And the secondary issue is, well, what are the areas of focus if they're not focusing on prosecutions? What are they doing? So that is a secondary issue. And my sense is that there is resourcing going into places where it should not be going. And these are some of the questions that we will ask. Now that the committee has been set up, we now have the standing powers of a Royal Commission effectively in terms of our ability to discover documents and to call witnesses from ASIC. And certainly over the summer months, I will be putting lots of questions to ASIC through our processes so that the ball starts rolling straight away.
Now, I'm very interested that you've called for submissions already. I think the 3rd of February is the deadline for submissions. What sort of submissions would you like to see?
Well, we want to hear from people and small businesses, and I'm often reminded that small businesses are people. And so we want to hear from people about their engagement with ASIC. I also want to hear from people that have given warnings to ASIC about issues that have been on their mind where action has not been taken. And my sense is that although it is going to be difficult for some of these people to come forward, it is really important that we put a stop to the lack of enforcement, because we don't want to live in a country where corporate laws are flouted. We don't want to be a basket case economy. We want to be a country where we have the rule of law. We're proud of the rule of law, and our regulators are successful, frankly. So we need to hear from people in terms of their experiences with ASIC, but we also want to hear, frankly, from people that have given warnings to ASIC about behaviours that they have observed.
And one of the things people might find a little daunting is to try and make a submission of adequate quality. What's your expectation there in terms of, how much do you need? Or is it something a little simpler that people could actually send you as part of this that would still be welcome?
Look, we don't want voluminous submissions, Martin. I mean, people can put in what they think is a reasonable explanation of their issue, and then we can go back and seek further information. I'm not big on make work schemes, and I think that there'll be enough examples out there for us to pull together a pretty good blueprint of what the problem is, or perhaps a better word is a good summary of what the problem is, and then we try and forge some solutions as a consequence.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, I think it's important that people don't feel too daunted by this, that, as you say, it's enough to get the ball rolling, and then potentially you may have the opportunity to follow up as needed, because certainly John and I have received a number of pieces of feedback from various parts of the community to say, well, we've got a story to tell, but we're not totally sure whether we've got the wherewithal to be able to tell it.
Yeah, look, I understand that, and I think working with government and dealing with government can be quite difficult, and the government generally doesn't make it easy for people to engage. So certainly in this case, we are looking for basic submissions of a few pages explaining what the issue is, and then we will come back in touch with the submitter if we need more information. And I think that's probably the best way for us to approach it and to make it accessible. And we want to have an inquiry which is accessible.
And one other little question here is that how far, are you prepared to go back? So, of course, we had, inquiries earlier. We had the Royal Commission. Some people will have felt maybe that their story wasn't adequately represented in the Royal Commission. So are you happy to go back in history, or are you really interested in more recent experiences?
Well, I think anything in the last 10 years would be reasonable for us to look at. Certainly the Royal Commission, which was led by Mr. Hayne, was a process which was thorough in how it looked at particular issues, but it didn't have the time to look at absolutely everything. And certainly there were some good examples made of bad behaviour, but I don't think that Hayne had the time to look at absolutely everything. So just because it happened before Hayne doesn't mean it's out of scope. Certainly, I think there are instances we need to explore that have occurred post-Hayne. And we have longer than Hayne had. We have 6 months longer, effectively. So I don't intend to be rushed here. I think we need to work out what are the areas that warrant the most attention. And, we'll keep a pretty open mind. I mean, to be honest with you, we're a little bit unconstrained, which is sort of the whole point of having a Senate. The whole point of it is, and of course, me not being a member of the government means that, I don't have any concerns about where this goes. I think the government of the day will always want to try and protect a regulator in some ways. In other ways, a government may want to throw the regulator to the wolves for political expediency. But I think in this case, this particular government will want to protect ASIC. I want to protect ASIC in an institutional sense as well. But I think we need to be providing an opportunity for people to have their say and for us to look at it frankly and fearlessly.
Sure. Now, I mean, one of the very shocking things, Senator, that came up in the last couple of months was this episode on Four Corners called The Wolf of Woy Woy, where you basically have an individual moving around New South Wales, and obviously you're a senator for New South Wales, basically ripping people off left, right and centre, untouched for 10 years. And then you had a whistleblower coming on national TV, basically saying he was the chief financial officer, had all the evidence, was willing and able to provide the government with all the evidence required. Not a phone call, not an email, and obviously that was particularly shocking in the sense that you had someone who could have, on the issue of not only prosecutions but commencing an investigation, could have given the government everything and basically no engagement. So now, what I guess one of the interesting things about the terms of reference that the Senate passed last week was whistleblowers were not specifically referenced, and I think I've had some communication from Four Corners in the last week. I think this particular whistleblower is keen to make a submission to the inquiry and obviously tell his story. So in terms of whistleblowers in particular, I'm assuming that the inquiry is also looking at whistleblower management and obviously in terms of the types of information they're providing to ASIC and how ASIC manages those individuals and that information.
Look, I understand that whistleblowers take on a certain level of personal risk when they do blow the whistle, and therefore they should be accorded with the strongest form of protection. And that's what I would provide as chair. So if people do want to come forward, they can engage through the committee if they would prefer. They, of course, will be afforded parliamentary privilege, which protects them as witnesses. But equally, if they would prefer to come through me as the chair, then they can contact my office and we will provide all the protection that they require in order to tell their stories. So, look, I will give the same answer on all these cases, that effectively, if there have been warnings given to ASIC about issues in the market and they have not been properly investigated, then that is a major issue. And we will be looking for evidence of that, because if that is happening on a systemic level, then that will warrant systemic recommendations from the committee.
And just one other quick question. The possibility of public hearings is clearly there. Do you think that will be part of the architecture of the inquiry?
Well, certainly the way the Senate runs its inquiries, we will be assessing the submissions during February and then looking to conduct public hearings, I would say, later in February or in March. Now, look, some people will want to have their evidence taken in camera. We can also do that. So you can imagine a situation where there will be people who will want to appear before the Senate with the openness of a public hearing, and others that would prefer to be heard in camera. Others that will get in contact and tell us about the existence of particular documents, which we can then seek with our powers that we have as effectively a standing Royal Commission now that we have into ASIC.
Sure. Now, I mean, one of the interesting pieces of feedback, Senator, over the last couple of weeks, as Martin and I have been doing these programs on this channel, is that we sense that there is a good portion of our audience in the community that is very excited by the prospect of the inquiry. But then there are other people who basically say, well, for example, in relation to ASIC, in the last decade, we've had reviews, we've had inquiries. I mean, the 2014 inquiry, the Sterling inquiry, we've had the Royal Commission, and yet ASIC's performance doesn't seem to be getting any better. And obviously, according to my own independent report, I say that it's getting worse. So I guess two questions on this point is, for those who are skeptical about what your inquiry potentially could achieve, I guess question one is, what do you hope the inquiry will achieve? And two, given that there's been previous attempts to examine ASIC in the past and that hasn't led to systemic improvement, why is your inquiry going to be different this time around?
Well, it's a good question, John. And I think part of the answer is that there have been a succession of various financial services ministers and the like. There's been a change of government, obviously. I'm someone that's had a long history of working in this industry and then engaging with ASIC and other regulators quite closely. So I feel like I have a reasonable amount of corporate memory here. And with a long-running inquiry, my sense is we have a fairly good shot of taking the long view on this, but also assessing some of the changes that have been made along the way. And look, I agree with you. There are many changes that have been made over the last 7 or 8 years, but some of those changes have not been executed. I mean, for example, the creation of a commissioner entirely focused on enforcement has come and gone, and so has that commissioner's or that former commissioner's advice on how to establish a permanent structure to enforce the law there. So a lot of the things, while they have appeared in ministerial press releases over the years in order to sort of buy off the press of the day, a lot of the changes haven't been made. And I think that what we will discover, I mean, look, I'll take an open mind to it, of course, but my sense is, to be frank and open, is that a lot of things have not changed, that there is a core at ASIC which has continued for many decades and has not been changed at all. So let's see. I mean, I've heard many coalition colleagues complain about the ABC over the years. I have to say that I'm probably one of the people in the coalition that is not so much a complainer about the ABC, but a user and consumer of the ABC. I accept the ABC is not perfect, but people take the view that the ABC hasn't changed at all and it can't be changed. Now, I think it can be changed. I think it has improved over the last little while, and I think ASIC is a similar institution in that it can be changed, but there might be a bit of institutional corrosion there that is hard to shift.
Yes, indeed. So, Senator, one of the issues we've got is there's quite a lot of feedback across Australia about specific case studies, and maybe ASIC didn't behave as they would have expected, or maybe disproportionately. Now, of course, a lot of this is legally sensitive. You mentioned earlier on parliamentary privilege, but I just wanted to come back to that because it's really important, I think, that people will feel assured that, if they do actually share information, there is a mechanism to provide protection, isn't there?
So if people come forward with information, they are protected by parliamentary privilege, which is that not only are they covered by a form of legal privilege, but they also cannot be disadvantaged in any way because of their decision to give evidence to a parliamentary committee. And so there are clear rules setting this out which protect witnesses, and any witness to a parliamentary inquiry will enjoy the heaviest level of protection. Now, if people are unsure about this, they can pick up the phone to the committee secretary, or secretariat perhaps, or they can also speak to my office about that. But it's imperative that people can come forward without feeling that they would be under threat in any way. Now, obviously, we can't manage every single thing that happens in people's lives, but certainly from a legal and parliamentary point of view, they are given a lot of protection.
Sure. One of the other questions, Senator, is that so part of what I was doing with my independent report about ASIC, and obviously what you said in terms of this interview is that there's a concern about the lack of investigations, the lack of prosecution, but we've also heard a very interesting subcategory of issues with ASIC, and that is where ASIC does decide to take action, but that action in the minds of some people is inappropriate, and it's been disproportionate. So I mean, I am talking to one particular outfit that I won't name in this interview, but their analogy was that ASIC is generally shy to pull the trigger, but in their case, they dropped a nuclear bomb on a humanitarian village, and they thought that was basically a whole host of assertions were rushed to court without proper investigation, and a lot of false things were said, and that the weight of ASIC's actions were not proportionate to the alleged offences, so to speak. So I guess, and also I've received an email over the weekend along these lines. So I'm assuming not only are you looking at instances of where people said something to ASIC and no action was taken, but also you're looking at where ASIC maybe have taken action against the small business community or people in the financial sector, and people feel that it was that they were the wrong target and the response was too heavy-handed.
We have to look at the law enforcement capacity of the agency and whether or not it is being used properly, and why they are not able to pursue more prosecutions, but equally why in some cases they appear to hit the wrong targets and hit them hard. So these are the questions that we need to ask, and we'll be looking for the real life information that we can get from the public under this new inquiry.
Well, Senator, thank you very much for coming on today and sharing your thoughts. I think this is a really important development. Congratulations again. And John and I will continue to wave the flag for this thorough review. We'll put the links to the Senate review down below so people can find the information there. And we'll watch the progress of the inquiry with great interest.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martin North, John Adams, interested people. We'll see you next time.